Today is July 22nd, 2016. My name is Chris Reedy, and I'm here today in Richmond, Indiana with Roger Kimball as part of Ball State's Ford Oval of Honor program for WIPB. We are in the home of Roger Kimball. Mr. Kimball, could you tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana on April 10th, 1947.
Okay. You were a Marine rifleman
Yes.
in Vietnam. Can you tell us what your thoughts were when you found out that you would be going to Vietnam?
Well, actually, when I enlisted in the Marine Corps, I was pretty naive 18-year-old, and I had not heard too much about Vietnam. I had heard the name mentioned, but I didn't really have a good grasp of what was going on over there. War was never something that was mentioned to me in that country until I got into the Marine Corps. And once I got in, and the DIs were talking about Vietnam, and you're going to go to war, and you're going to have to, while we're training you to survive when you get there, it started to hit home. It made me kind of think, my gosh, what have I done? So my initial thoughts were it couldn't be that bad, but my mind got changed pretty quickly. It was that bad and worse in many cases. And there was a lot of people that died over there that didn't have to die, I think. And I was never one to look at the political side of events in the world or the country. So I didn't know a lot about what it was all about, other than we'd been told, we're going to stop communism. And communism had always kind of been a bad word for us young guys when we were in school. And so we thought we were going there to stop communism. And that was what I felt like I was doing.
You had that as your motivation. That was your background, your upbringing. When you got the shock in your training that you were going to Vietnam, how well were you prepared? How would you describe your training?
Well, our training was at Camp Pendleton in California. It was very rigorous. They increased your physical strength and your endurance, marksmanship with weapons. They taught you how to fight hand-to-hand combat. There were many aspects of military training to prepare us for going into a war zone. And I think we were, for our era of kids, we were about as well prepared as anybody could be. We had really good training instructors, and most of them had already been there, so they knew what we were going to be up against. And accordingly, they trained us to be ready to walk into a combat situation in a very short time after you got there and be able to function and call on your training and your knowledge of what they had given you to survive immediately. You didn't have to go through any long process again to kind of acclimate yourself. So I thought we were well trained for what it was in the 60s. Training today is a lot different, but back then I think they did a very good job, and because of their efforts and their experience of having been there, they'll help save a lot of lives.
Was there one particular lesson that you took from your training that immediately paid dividends when you got to Vietnam?
Keep your head down and keep moving. So, yeah, that was one of the things one of our instructors told us. He said, when you get to Vietnam, he said, don't stand in one place too long. He said, be vigilant, don't bunch up, stay spread out, and when the shooting starts, get your head down and keep moving, because a sitting still target's a whole lot easier to hit than one moving. So I think that was one of the primary things that stayed with me all the time I was there, was to if we got into a fight with the enemy, to stay maneuverable and not stay in one place too long, and maneuvered yourself into a position where you could be effective in a good firefight. So
most untrained people like myself, once danger is present, they hunker down. Did you find it hard to get up and get moving?
No, when we were trained in boot camp, going through the guerrilla warfare program, Marines primarily are trained in a method where when the fighting starts, you go to the fight. Sitting back and hunkering down can sometimes be the worst thing you can do. So typically, any Marine unit that starts hearing firefighting going on or shots fired, they immediately move toward the fight where it is and to engage the enemy. And rarely did I ever see that not happen, if unless you were in a location where you were already entrenched in a line in a combat base where you were there to protect the lines. Of course, you didn't get out of your hole and go advance toward them, but in the rice paddies and in the jungles and the little villages and the places where we were patrolling, as soon as the first shot was fired, we ran toward it. And because we wanted to engage the enemy and we wanted to get the fight going and get it over with and defeat them. And I think a lot of our training entrenched that in our minds.
I may skip down a little bit here. We've hit some of these. Real quick, what was your first impression when you landed in Vietnam? What was your first impression of the country?
It was hot and smelly. It was when that door opened on that airplane, when we flew in from when we landed the first time, the odor of the country was just it was like a stench. I can't really describe it. And it was really hot. I mean, you're talking 110, 12, 15 degrees, and humidity at 100%. And that was my first impression was, this place is going to be terrible to live in. And it was. I mean, and that stench never went away, and unless you got way out into the lowlands or into the jungle areas where you got away from a lot of the places where there were many villages congregated, because I think a lot of that stench came from what they cooked and the animals that they had and how they fertilized their rice paddies and all that. And the heat and humidity exacerbated that. But once you got away from the larger populated areas, it seemed to subside. But you never got away from the heat or the humidity. It was always present, even during the monsoons.
Yeah. Describe your first few days when you got to your unit.
Well, when I got to my unit, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, they were in Okinawa. The unit had previously been in southern part of Vietnam in Chu Lai, and had returned to Okinawa to regroup and rearm and retrain due to some losses of men. And so when I met up with my unit, it was there in Okinawa at Camp Schwab. And they had just arrived probably a few days before I got there. So I had basically 30 days of whatever training they were going to give us while we were there, and liberty at night. So we went on a lot of liberty. They gave everybody a lot of liberty to unwind and, go out and have a good time and get your mind off of what was going on. But I really enjoyed Okinawa. It was a pretty nice island to be on, and everybody was really nice. And of course, being 18 years old, you go looking for the ladies of the evening in the bars, and everybody looks for a bar to go to and drink and and dance with the girls and have a good time. And so that first 27 or 28 days that I was with my unit was sort of fun in a lot of ways, but we also did a lot of hard work during the day to prepare ourselves to return to Vietnam.
Unlike later Marines who were sent over to their units in Vietnam, do you think your experience meeting up with this group outside of Vietnam, outside of combat, helped form bonds?
I think it did, because when you meet up with a unit outside the Vietnam area, like in Okinawa, you have an opportunity to sit down and talk to the guys that have been there. You get to listen to their experiences and pull from their knowledge. And a lot of the guys that were there, the NCOs particularly, would go, it was their job to get you involved in your particular platoon and squad, and start teaching you even more about what you were going to be faced with when you got to Vietnam. So yeah, I think having gone to a unit that was not in Vietnam at the first is much more beneficial than being landed in Vietnam and having to go straight out to a combat unit that's already in the field. And quite often, I'm sure guys, when they arrived at their unit, they were under fire immediately. And that's a real shock to your system. I don't care who you are. It's just, you think you're saying, boy, I didn't sign up for this, but a lot of that was the reality of war. They were out there fighting and they needed their replacements, and you might just happen to be one of them. So you had to, in that case, you had to be ready to fit in quickly and become an effective member of the squad that you were assigned to, and hopefully remain alive long enough to start drawing from the benefits of those experienced Marines that were in the field and had been there for quite a long time. So if I had my rathers, I would have gone the way I did and not had to go straight into combat from one extreme to another within a day or two.
And you're here talking to us, so it had to have paid benefits for you.
Something had to pay off somewhere, because yeah, you're right. I'm still here today, and by the grace of God, I made it through, and a lot of my friends did not. And we got over 58,000 names on those granite walls up there in Washington D.C. to attest to the ravages of the military units and the families and all the servicemen and women who got killed over there. But yeah, I feel extraordinarily fortunate that I survived Vietnam and was able to come home and live my life and have a good life, whereas I know many of my friends died at 18 years old and never got that opportunity.
And you were in the front lines. You were a Marine rifleman. Can you describe your military occupation or specialty? And
well, I was the occupational specialty of 0311 is a rifleman in the Marine Corps, and every Marine from the lowest private to the highest general is a rifleman. That's his basic job. And then you have a lot of subcategories of mortarmen and machine gunners and what have you. And I was a rifleman in a squad, but I was assigned to a machine gun crew of 3 men. There was a gunner, an assistant gunner, and then what they referred to as an ammo humper. So I was an ammo humper, but I wasn't the only one, because everybody in the squad carried ammunition for the machine gun, belts, laced over you or in cans. When we went out on patrol or on an operation, because the M60 machine gun was a formidable weapon that kept a lot of people alive because of its firepower. So being a rifleman, you may be a rifleman, but you may have to fill in on other jobs too, not just be a rifleman by itself. My gunner and a gunner both got wounded and sent to a Navy hospital ship same time I got wounded. I had to take over the gun. I was it. There was no other gunners, qualified gunners in the platoon or the company that could move into that slot. So I had taken over the gun, and I became the gunner and assistant gunner while we were out on patrol for a long time, until they finally got those 2 MOSs filled. And so you have to be versatile, and they train you to do this through boot camp and advanced infantry training, and you have to be, as the Marine Corps says, you have to be able to adapt and overcome. And that's what we did. You filled whatever shoes needed to be filled.
you talked about the firepower and how it saved lives. When you moved into the gunner spot, did you feel an added sense of responsibility?
I did, but I also felt an added sense of power. When you get behind an M60 machine gun with belted ammunition and have 500 or 600 rounds linked together, and you get into a firefight and you start firing that gun, you then begin to realize just how much firepower that thing will produce. It's an awesome weapon, and it's still used today in our military, along with other versions of it. But we affectionately called it the pig. The gun would fire so fast, 750 rounds a minute, nonstop, and you could just lay down a curtain of lead and firepower against the enemy that was just, it's just devastating. And so it gives you a sense of power and even pride, I guess you could say, that you're able to contribute to a combat action in that manner and help your unit and your buddies fight off the enemy. And so a lot of emotions go through your mind, and physically, emotionally and mentally, when you're firing that thing. It's just, you just have to do it to believe it. I mean, it's just really, really a fine weapon, and highly thought of. So yeah, I enjoyed carrying. I hated it when they had to take it away from me. I really wanted to keep it and stay with it, but they wouldn't let me do it.
Can you describe the first time you came under fire?
The first time I came under fire, we had gone out on a patrol from Dong Ha, where our regimental headquarters was located, and we were going to be out on a 3 or 4 day patrol, searching for the enemy. We were always on search and destroy missions. There were a lot of other units that went on recon missions. They didn't get in. They didn't want to engage the enemy. They wanted to see where they were and what they were doing. But our unit was an infantry combat ground unit, and we were set up to engage the enemy and search them out and destroy them if possible. So we had gone on a patrol. We'd been out all day long, walking, and it was in kind of a lowland area, but we had approached an area near the jungle, and we pulled off. We found a trail that had been well walked on. It was on Ho Chi Minh's birthday, and we had pulled up to take a little breather and rest and eat, get something to eat. So we had set up on the backside of a little hill along this trail, and somebody at the top of the little hill happened to look over the top of the hill to see if he could see anything, and here came a Viet Cong patrol down the trail. They estimated probably close to 25 or 30. They were being led by a young woman, and so we immediately set up a hasty ambush along the backside of the trail, on the backside of the hill along the trail. And our platoon commander, he said, "I will spring the ambush when you hear the ping of my grenade go off, open fire." The patrol walked right out to the edge of that hill where we were set up, and I was eyeball to eyeball with this girl, but she was looking out and I was looking at her from the side. She didn't see me, and all she had to do was turn her head and she'd have known that we were all there. And they stopped right there. They didn't walk any further. They were looking across the low area to see if anything was moving. And our platoon commander released the hand grenade. I heard the ping, and we all opened fire. And there were a few shots fired back at us, but I think our initial blast of opening fire killed most of the front few people that we could immediately see, 5 or 6, and the rest of their patrol turned tail and ran back into the jungle. And so that was the first firefight I got into, but they didn't really fire too many shots back at us, maybe 5 or 6, because we devastated them so quickly. And I remember after it was over, we walked down onto the trail, and the girl was laying there on the trail, dead. And I looked at her and I thought, this girl couldn't be more than 18 years old. And she was gone, you know. There were other guys that had been with her. They'd crawled up into the underbrush, and we had to go in there and find them. I think we found 4 or 5 more, and one of them was laying on his face, and he had his arms under him. And my initial thought, he's got a hand grenade under his, and if we roll him over, the pin will probably release, and somebody could get hurt or killed. So a guy reached down to grab him by the shoulder, and I said, don't roll him over. I said, we need a rope, tie a rope around his arm and roll him over from a distance, because he may very well have a hand grenade. And so just so happened a guy had a rope in his pack, and we did that. And when they turned him over, he had a hand grenade in his hand, but he had not been able to pull the pin out of the and to release the handle. He died before he could do that. But it could have spelled some disaster for us had we reacted a little too quickly. But some guys that get in their first firefight, I've seen guys get sick. I've seen guys sit down and cry. And I just stood there and kind of probably shocked to some degree of having been involved in taking somebody's life, but it was a situation where it was us or them. And in that instance, we came out ahead. And it doesn't get any easier as you get into other fights. You know, you're fighting for your life and everybody around you, and that's what you're trained to do. And eventually, you get hardened against the emotions of it. You never get over the emotions of seeing your friends killed. And but aside from killing the enemy, after that, it never really bothered me too much.
You talk about the fighting for your friends. Unit cohesion is something that the Marines pride themselves in. Did you get along with everyone in your unit? And once the firing started, did any kind of disagreements dissipate?
I never had any. My unit we were always pretty tight with each other. We got along. I mean, you'd have little disputes every now and then, but most of all the guys got along really well. I never had any issues with any of the guys. So we didn't really have to kiss and make up later, so to speak. But we all understood we were fighting for each other, and each other's all we had. So if you had a difference with somebody, you set it aside, and at some point in the future, if you might take it up again. But I rarely saw any kind of conflict between guys in my unit to the point that it created any problems. I mean, you might have an argument every now and then about something, but it never escalated. Yeah.
So the Brotherhood of the Marine Corps.
The Brotherhood of the Marine Corps, yeah. I mean, you're brothers forever. We had each other's back, regardless of what it took.
Talked about being on the N60 crew. You were in the I Corps region. The Marines were far to the north in South Vietnam, near the demilitarized zone. Were you engaging primarily NVA regulars or Viet Cong?
Well, when we were located in the I Corps, was where we actually started. We landed at Phu Bai. We were the original Phu Bai Marines to ever land there. And a few months later, we moved north to Dong Ha and began running a lot of search and destroy missions out of there. Ambushes and patrols and major operations combined with other units. We mostly encountered the NVA. Once in a while, we'd get into a skirmish with a Viet Cong squad, but typically what we saw was the seasoned veterans of the North Vietnamese Army that had infiltrated that area, because we were right there at the DMZ. I could see the DMZ from where we were stationed for a while at Con Thien, and it was like half a mile away, and you could see North Vietnam. And there were times when we'd go out on patrols and maneuver our way up north and go into the DMZ area, which basically there was no cover there. It was all flattened. I mean, every ounce of trees and brush and everything had been destroyed, so that if they did try to infiltrate, we could see them moving across that open area and bring fire on them. So yeah, the NVA was the predominant force in that area that were infiltrating into the South in the 66 and mostly in 67, because they were gearing up for Tet 68. So they were trying to get as many thousands of troops into that area as they could, divisions of them. And we knew they were in there. We go and hunt for them, and sometimes you just couldn't find them. And we later learned that they were underground. They had a massive amount of tunnels and chains of tunnels in these mountains we didn't know anything about. And but we discovered that this is what they were doing when we were up in the DMZ along the Quaviat River. The soil up in that area is very sandy. And this was in '67, and had gone home and come back, and I was in Mike Company at this time instead of K Company. I was moved to Mike Company, and my platoon commander, my company commander, was Captain Richard Jackson, and he always felt like the NVA and the Viet Cong were hiding from us underground. But we never could really find their tunnel complexes and their entrances, and as hard as we looked, they were so well camouflaged you could walk right by them. He got a hold of an artillery unit and got some of the steel rods from them out of the ammo cases, the ammunition cases that they fired their shells from, and took them over to the engineering group and had them grind the points and make a point on it, and created a big long spike that was 4 or 5 feet long. And we could shove that into the sandy soil, and as long as we kept hitting resistance, we knew there wasn't a tunnel under us. But if you shoved it down 2 or 3 feet and became really loose, you knew there was a tunnel there. And so he issued one of those to every Marine in our company. And everybody, as you'd walk along, you would stick this big long spike into the ground. And eventually we started finding these tunnels. Well, this spike became known as the Mike Spike. And the commanding general, Lieutenant General Walt of 3rd Marine Division, found out about it. And he said, "This is a great idea." He said, "I want every Marine on the coastal areas to have a Mike Spike." So they had adopted this tool, if you will, and began to use it, and it became a very useful tool to find out where these guys were hiding out. And we found some large tunnel complexes and ammunition caches and food and everything, hospitals, all kind of stuff that was underground. And that's when they started taking a serious look at some of these mountains and found out. I mean, have you heard of the tunnels of Cu Chi? Massive complex of tunnels, but nobody knew about it until after it was maybe discovered quite by accident, I guess. But we always felt that they were underground somewhere. We just couldn't dig them out, like little moles.
Did that lead to engagements where you had to go in after them, or they came out to engage you?
Sometimes when we would find a tunnel complex, we would generally have a 1 or 2 guys in our unit that were called tunnel rats. And they were small of stature, and I'm glad I wasn't that small, because I didn't want to have to go into one of those tunnels. And they would take a .45 pistol and a K-bar knife, and they would strip down to nothing but their utilities. I mean, they'd get rid of their pack and everything, and they'd crawl through those tunnels looking for them. And if they found them, they would kill them. And I don't recall ever having an outright engagement with a force of them because we found their tunnel systems. Mostly it was the tunnels were there and they had moved on to somewhere else, but we did find a lot of ammunition and food supplies and hospitals and underground that had been used, and but they didn't. Very rarely did we ever have any come out of a tunnel system and engage us. I don't recall that ever happening while I was there.
Earlier, you were talking about in the run-up to Tet, you were part of Operation Hastings. And can you tell us a little bit about that and what your unit did during that?
Well, Operation Hastings was, at that time, was the largest single operation of ground forces to form up to engage the enemy anywhere in Vietnam at the time. We had some 8,000 Marines in the I Corps area of different units. We had some Army of the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam forces attached to us. I think there was even a couple of Army units attached to us to go into Operation Hastings. And it started on July 15th, 1966, and it ran through August 3rd. And the operation was designed to seek out the 324th B Division that we knew was moving into Vietnam through our area. up to that point, we'd never been able to catch them and pinpoint them in a particular area. But we had some intel reports that the spotter planes had seen these massive amounts of forces moving south, and had a pretty decent idea of where they were headed. They were going to come down through the Songnan Valley, which was probably a couple of miles long, and it was right up against the northern. It was right up against the southern boundary of the DMZ. So they put this force together, and my unit was set up to be the blocking force at the end of the valley, and all of the other units went into various parts of the area at the other end of the valley and became like a pincher approach, and began to move in on the division, which forced them down the valley. And when they finally got to where we were, that's when the battle started, and we fought those guys for days in that valley. We had, us and the other units had several hundred killed over the period of time, but they lost thousands. We hammered that division so badly that they had to return to North Vietnam to reman and re-equip. Our intent was to annihilate them, literally. We didn't, but we hurt them awfully bad. And that was the main unit that we seemed to entangle with in Vietnam from then on out. Everywhere we went, they seemed to show up. So we didn't really encounter too many of the other units that we knew were in that area. And it was part of the North Vietnam's buildup that was eventually lead up to Tet 68. And we kept giving reports to the upper echelon of officers and generals and what have you, and Da Nang, telling them that the NVA are moving massive amounts of troops and equipment and supplies down from North Vietnam, and they're coming down this area where we are. They're also using Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was under almost continuous bombardment with B-52 strikes, and several other areas. And the commander of all the ground forces in Vietnam, who was General Westmoreland, didn't seem to want to believe what we were telling him. He said they just can't possibly be moving that many people across the DMZ without us knowing about it. And our officers kept saying, they are, and we see them, and they're coming. And he just wouldn't buy it. And eventually, as you know, Tet 68 happened, and that's where many of the forces came from. They also moved a lot through Laos and down through there, and to come in down around Da Nang and areas like that. But large amounts of forces came across the DMZ, and we reported it, and we couldn't get a lot of people to believe us until by then it was too late. And then they massed their forces and started the Tet. I was gone, fortunately. I left in October '67, so I didn't get involved in Tet.
You talked about the 324B Division of Army of North Vietnam. On a professional level, you were battle-hardened Marine by that time. How would you gauge the NVA regulars?
Well, the 324th B Division, and I would say most all of the NVA regulars, were seasoned Marines. Seasoned troops. They'd been fighting this war for years. They fought the Chinese. They fought the Japanese. So they were seasoned veterans for the most part of some kind of conflict in their country. And they were well trained, they were well equipped. As we know, China and Russia supplied a lot of arms and ammunition for them. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they could stand up and fight toe to toe with the best of them. I'd say we had a lot of respect for them because of their abilities and their desires to fight. They typically would not turn tail and run from us unless they were completely overwhelmed by numbers. But they were fighters, and we would give them their due. You know, I won't say they were as good as us. I don't think we were a really disciplined and hard fighting force. All of our Marine units up there were. So I'd say, but they didn't have a lot of the technology we had. They didn't have the airplanes and a lot of the stuff that we had to help fight this war. Had they had that, who knows what would have happened. But yeah, they were good fighters, and you had to give them their respect for that. Sure did.
On a personal level, from the time you deployed until when you left in October of '67, how did you change?
When I got into Vietnam, I was a naive 18-year-old kid. When you get into your first firefight or get engaged with the enemy in some kind of a altercation, you grow up really, really fast. And I would, they say, well, you was a boy one day and you was a man the next. And I think a lot of that's true. Your thought processes, your emotions, everything that you've done up to that point changes, and you just grow up and become something other than a boy so quick. And I think that happened to me pretty much. I grew up fast, a lot faster than anybody should have to under those circumstances. But that's the nature of war. It's happened in every war that we've ever had. Young boys go fight the wars that old men make, and it's never changed. It's been that way through time.
You were awarded the Purple Heart. Can you describe the circumstances when you were wounded?
I was wounded on 18th of May, 1966. We, at the particular time, we were still in Phu Bai. And we had mounted up in trucks that morning, 6x6 trucks, to deploy south of Phu Bai to go to take over security for an artillery battalion that was located south of us that provided fire support for units in the I Corps. And at the time, I didn't know where we were going or what we were going to do. I didn't learn about this until later, but we were going to eventually be the perimeter security for this battery. And we had gone out of Phu Bai and eventually turned off onto a gravel road and was wandering our way through the countryside, which consisted mostly of low-lying scrub brush type things. It wasn't heavily jungled or rice paddies or anything. It was just the intercoastal area. And I was sitting in the back of the truck. My squad leader was sitting to my left, and I had my legs hanging over the side of the truck, facing outward like most everybody was. And we came up to a little stream that the truck was going, and he slowed down to cross it. And just as we entered that stream, something told me, pull your legs back inside this truck. So I did. I swung my legs back inside, and we went across the creek and started up the slight incline on the other side, and we hit a booby-trapped 155 shell. It was, the Viet Cong detonated it right under us, and it was right under the tires where I was sitting. To this day, I cannot remember ever hearing the explosion. First thing I remembered was I was floating in the air, and I opened my eyes, and there was an orange-red ball of fire all around me because it had blown the gas tanks to the truck and ignited the fuel. It blew me out of the truck, out of the back of the truck, and I landed on the gravel road in a sitting position, just like I'd been sitting in the truck. And adrenaline, or I'm not sure what took over, but I bounced to my feet immediately. I didn't have my helmet on. I didn't have a flak jacket on, which I had been wearing. My rifle was gone. And I remember running down to the left side of the truck down a slope because my platoon commander was there. And had been riding in the cab. And he had gotten out of the cab and come around the front of the truck, and he had fire coming out of underneath his flak jacket and his shirt, and he was pulling at it trying to get it open, but it was zipped. And as I ran up to him, another guy, Corporal Davis, came from behind him and had already unwrapped a rain poncho, and we both tackled him at the same time and got him on the ground, wrapped him up in this poncho, and smothered the fire. He was burned pretty bad. He eventually ended up losing his right ear. It burned him so bad. I had burns on both arms and the right side of my face, and I had some piece of shrapnel in my right knee. And I turned around, and my machine gunner was sitting on the ground behind me with his feet straight out and both hips blown out of joint. I could tell he had been hurt. And he was sitting there saying, "I want to go home. I want to go home." And I grabbed him by the front of his shirt, threw him up over my shoulder, and ran down the hill to a little area where there was like a small rise in the ground. And I went around behind it and laid him down. And I went back and there was another guy, two guys walking around behind the truck in a daze. One of them was my squad leader, and it had blown his boots completely off of him. And he was walking around in a daze, and I grabbed him, and he was able to walk, so I walked him down there, and I went back up, and there was another guy there that was a rifleman. I never knew his real name, but I know we called him Tex. He was from Amarillo, Texas. And he was a little older than we were, and he was standing there, and he literally had shreds of skin hanging off of his arms where the concussion of that blast had literally blown the skin off of his arms, so, one or two layers, and he had burns on him. And I walked up to him and I said the most stupid thing. I said, "Tex, does that hurt?" And he said, "Hell yes, it hurts." So I said, "Well, come on, I'll get you down here where it's safe, because that ammunition in that truck's going to start cooking off here pretty soon, and we're going to have bullets and hand grenades and everything else exploding." So I got him off the hill and got him down there where the other guys were, and sure enough, the ammo started cooking off, and bullets were flying everywhere. And in the meantime, they had taken our platoon sergeant and got him up the hill because they'd called in a medevac chopper to pull those guys out. And I went up over the hill and looked again, and there was another guy that was up there by the truck walking around. And I said, "Somebody doesn't get that guy, he's going to get killed by this ammunition cooking off." So I ran up there and I got a hold of him. Well, he was hurt, so I threw him over my shoulder and ran him back down the hill. Well, by then the fire was really raging and the ammunition was cooking off, and it was just, everybody was running helter-skelter trying to get away from it. And so eventually the flames burned down and the ammunition stopped exploding, and we set up a perimeter to protect the area where we were. Unknowingly, we weren't that far from the artillery battery, and they witnessed the whole thing. They saw the whole thing from up there. We were probably a half a mile down the road from them, and they could see the whole thing. And so eventually the corpsman got around to us and worked on the guys that were hurt the worst, and he finally got over to me, and they put some salve and stuff all over my arms and my face, and pulled the shrapnel out of my knee and stuck a bandage on that. And but my machine gun crew, my gunner and A gunner and platoon sergeant and a couple other guys were evacuated to a hospital ship. And that was when and where I took over the M60 as the primary gunner for the gun, because we didn't have anybody else. And so we stayed there 4 or 5 days, and we got some replacements in to kind of help us out a little bit and reinforce our unit. And then we went back to Dong Ha, or back to Phu Bai. We never made it to the artillery battery. They took us back to Phu Bai to kind of lick our wounds, I guess you'd say. But that's how I got wounded.
Did that experience kind of stick with you as far as any time you drove somewhere in a truck? And did it change your mannerisms or your actions?
That experience didn't really have any impact with me regarding riding in vehicles until I was ready to come home. And at the time I came home in October of '67, we were in Cantien, the meat grinder. And we had been battered by the NVA with artillery and rockets and mortars, and they tried to infiltrate our lines. They were always trying to run us off of that hill because we could see everything that was going on up there, and we were a thorn in their side. So we were constantly being bombarded by them. And when it was time for me to come home, one of the guys came down and he said, "Pack your gear, you're going home." And I knew I was getting close to the point of time where it was time to get released. And so I just grabbed what I had and ran up the hill. And he said, get on that truck right there. And he said, "You're going back to Dong Ha to be processed out of the country." Or to Dong Ha, to Da Nang, to be processed out. So I got in the truck. There were 2 or 3 other guys in there with us. And we left the confines of Cantien. And once we left there, we were in what we called Indian country. You know, anything could happen outside that boundary. The driver, he thought he was going to be cute, so when we were riding down this dirt road, he shut the engine off and backfired the engine. It sounded just like a rifle shot. Of course, scared the daylights out of all of us. And after I realized what we'd done, one of the guys next to me stuck his M14 right in the back of his head. He said, "You ever do anything like that again?" He said, "I'll kill you." He said, "We're going home." And he said, to do something like that to us is uncalled for. And he said, "You better drive this truck and drive it properly." He says, "Or you're not going to survive this trip." He was mad. He was really angry. And I was too. Scared the daylights out of me. Because I thought, man, all this time I've been here and now I'm going home and somebody's going to try to take me out before I get there. But that was really the only time I think that I had any kind of a flashback from being in a truck from the time I got wounded.
You served your 1-year tour and signed on for an additional 6 months, 8 months. Why? What was your thought process there?
Well, the Marine Corps tour in Vietnam was 13 months. And that I got there in March of '66, or actually February, and my tour started overseas. And we went to Vietnam, and down about October, maybe early November of '66, the military came up with this plan to provide anybody who would extend their existing tour for 6 months, could go home on a free 30-day leave. So they came around and pitched that little program to us, and I thought about it. I thought, gosh, if I play my cards just right, I can be home for Christmas. Not stopping to think that if I'd just stay beyond Christmas, I'd have been going home in March anyway. But the lure of going home and being with my family for Christmas was a pretty strong draw. So I signed up for it. And sure, yeah, I went home. I came home in December, probably about the 10th of December, I think I got home. Was home for 30 days, free 30-day leave, wasn't charged to me or anything. All transportation was provided, and spent Christmas here at home, and then went back to Vietnam in January. And when I left, I was in K Company, or Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. When I went back, they assigned me to Mike Company. Still in 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. I didn't leave my unit, just changed companies. And so when I got back, I realized, golly, I still got 6 months more to do. Well, I miscalculated, because they don't figure it that way. Your 6-month tour doesn't start until after you've completed your 13-month tour. So I still technically had 9 months left. So it ended up carrying me into October of '67. And if I had just thought about it and been smart about it, I would have been home in a lot sooner and not had to go back. But it's just the way it was. The lure was too strong. So
Did your morale stay for that last 9 months? Was it good throughout, or as you got short, did it change?
My morale never really changed a whole lot. I always believed I would go home alive. I really never doubted it. Even when we were in heavy combat situations, sometimes I always felt like that I was going to make it home okay. So I never let go of that. But as you start becoming what we call a short timer, in your last 30 days, you start to get a lot more careful about where you go and what you do and who you hang around close to and the things you do, and because you know your time is going to be short and you're not going to get out of the field until about a week before you're ready to be processed home. So yeah, your attitude and your morale does change a little bit toward the tail end, because you're constantly thinking, I've only got a few weeks left. Man, I don't want to do something stupid and die in this country now. And but yeah, it changed a little bit when it got that short.
And when you were seated in the Freedom Bird and you got above AAA and small arms fire, what were your feelings then?
When I left, when I was told to leave Vietnam or get my gear together, of course I was in the truck. We got to Dong Ha. From there, we got on a C-130. They flew us to Da Nang to be processed, and got into Da Nang and went through all the processing out, signing the papers and turning in your equipment and getting ready to leave. And the airlines that they were using at that time was Golden Continental Airways. And of course we were sitting in the barn there along the tarmac, and they announced over a loudspeaker that the airplane was within sight, and we could see it coming in at a distance. And you wanted to stand up and cheer, but you didn't want to tempt fate too much, because Da Nang would come under rocket attacks all the time, and it wasn't. You still weren't out of the woods yet. So eventually we got on board, and when they closed the doors and they took off, you're still thinking, please God, don't let them hit this plane with a rocket. And you lift off, and you're still not quite out of the woods just yet until you reach a certain altitude. And once we reached the safe altitude and they came over the loudspeakers and said, you are out of danger and you're going to be out of Vietnam airspace very soon, and the whole plane just erupts. There's every emotion you can think of. Guys cheering, guys crying, beating each other on the back, hugging each other, kissing those stewardesses. I mean, it was just everything. And it was such an uplifting moment that you go through a whole gamut of emotions. And it was then that I knew that I was free from that country and the war. But at the same time, I remembered that my unit is still there.
The men you
Yeah.
stood
And
shoulder
you
to
feel,
shoulder.
and you kind of feel guilty that you've had to leave them there to fight on, but the realization is that that's just part of the game. And so the emotions are vastly different for everybody. And I felt sorry for my buddies that had to stay there, but I was happy to be out of that place. So
Looking back 50 years, how would you say that your experiences in Vietnam and as a Marine shaped the rest of your life?
Well, my experiences in Vietnam, as I stated earlier, you have to grow up fast when you go into a combat zone as a young guy. You learn a lot of discipline You learn to take care of each other. You learn to take care of yourself. You learn how to react to orders that you've been given without stopping to think, is this a good order or is it a bad order? You were told to do something and you have to do it. And many, many times the order was given and it probably saved your life in a lot of ways. It gave me a lot of, I'd say it gave me a lot of confidence in myself to persevere through whatever life was going to throw at me in the future. I had no idea what it would be, but I was ready to meet it head on and do what I had to do and become, a good responsible citizen and fit into the normal days of work life and raising a family and doing all the things you do when you become a young man and as you grow older and have grandchildren, and it makes you appreciate your life a whole lot more than you might have had you not experienced that, I think.
What was it like coming home?
When we got home, we landed in California, in Los Angeles. At that time, I don't think that the protesters against the war were as active as they became later in like '68. I didn't really see any protests going on the other side of the fences where we landed and didn't hear anything going on. It was in the middle of the night. Now during the day might have been a different story, but when we got in, it was really late at night. Actually, I think it might have been 2 a.m. So we didn't have to encounter that too much. Again, we went through a processing there in LA, and you got your airplane ticket, and they flew you to your home area where you were, and I flew into Indianapolis. I had called my aunt and uncle who lived in Indianapolis at the time, and I'd been in contact with them via mail prior to that, so they knew I was coming home. They just didn't know exactly when, but I called them from LA and told them I'll be home tomorrow, and my plane arrives at such and such hour. And she said, we'll pick you up at the airport. I said, great. So when my plane landed, there were cabbies and people who wanted to take you home. I'll drive you home for $50. No, I got transportation. But everybody seemed to be pretty nice to us. But I walked out the terminal at the Indianapolis airport. My aunt and uncle pulled up, and my aunt burst into tears. And I later found out that she had told my uncle, she said, my God, he looks like he come out of a concentration camp. He's so thin. And had dark circles around my eyes. And I'd lost weight. I was pretty thin back then. And but I didn't realize I looked quite as bad as maybe she thought I had. The tropics will take a lot out of you, especially in a war zone. So anyway, I went to their house, and I had made previous arrangements to buy a car from my uncle that he had, and so he tossed me the keys, and he said, go ahead and go home, and he said, we'll work out the details later. And so I drove home, and I guess my mom and dad didn't know when I was going to arrive, really. I mean, they knew I was coming in, and it would be sometime during that day or the next day. And when I pulled up, and I went up and knocked on the door, and Mom opened the door, and she nearly passed out. She didn't realize I was going to be home that soon. And so it was a joyous reunion with family and friends. I didn't encounter any of the Vietnam haters here in Richmond. I didn't see it happening. but I heard, later on that there was a lot of people who went through a lot of the name calling and the spitting and throwing stuff at him, and but I didn't experience that. I would have to say my experience to come home was pretty good.
Before we wrap up completely, did you entertain any thoughts of staying in the Corps?
When I returned from Vietnam, I still had a year and a half left on my enlistment of 4 years. I had orders to report to Naval Air Station in Dallas, in Grand Prairie, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. And I'm thinking, Naval Air Station? What in the world do they want with a rifleman, an old grunt Marine who carried an M60 machine gun at a Naval Air Station? But that's where they sent me. So after my leave was up, I drove my car, my Mustang, and I drove to Texas, and I reported in. And the day that I reported was Saturday, and of course, there wasn't anybody, in the offices or anything to do anything. So the guard at the gate said, go over to the barracks and report into the sergeant of the day and the officer of the day, and tell them you're here and give them your orders, and they'll tell you what to do. So I did, and they said, well, go on liberty, and you can't do anything until Monday. So I went out and kind of drove around, saw the town, and did a few things, and had dinner, and stopped at the bar and had a beer, and so Monday morning I go to check in at the headquarters, at the Marine headquarters there on the Navy base, and wasn't anybody there. 8 o'clock. And I thought, well, this is unusual. So about 9:30, I'm sitting there on the doorstep waiting on somebody to show up. Here comes a gunnery sergeant walking up the sidewalk. I said, Gunny, I'm supposed to report in today. Oh yeah, you must be Sergeant so-and-so, or Corporal so-and-so. I said, yeah, I was a corporal at the time. And I said, yeah. He said, okay. He said, come on inside. So we went inside, and I handed him my service record book, my orders. And he said, okay. He said, have a seat. He said, we'll go over and get some breakfast here in a little bit. So he read through my stuff. He said, let's go down to Chow Hall and we'll get some breakfast. So we did that, came back. Eventually people started filing into the administration office and the building, and it was like 10 o'clock. Well, I'd never experienced anything like that. And so I asked the Gunny, I said, Gunny, why am I here? He said, well, according to your service record book, you know how to type. I said, yeah, I took typing in high school. He said, we need an administration clerk. I said, Gunny, I'm a rifleman. I'm an 0311. He said, not now. You're going to be one of my clerks. I said, well, what is it that you people do here? He said, we train reserves. And they come in on a weekend once a month for 2 days, and we do various types of training with them. And you're going to be a part of that program. Officers flew jets. The ground personnel, the mechanics, they worked on them. And then you had the administration personnel that worked in the offices and things like that. I said, Gunny, I don't know anything about being an administrative clerk. And furthermore, I don't want to be an administrative clerk. He said, you don't have any choice. He said, this is where you're stationed and this is what you're going to be. Well, I kind of tossed that around. I thought, well, it could be worse. So he kind of tried to start breaking me in on how to do some of the office things around there. And he said, but mainly I did a lot of typing for him, typed up letters and orders and all kind of stuff. And one day he come in, he says, grab your gear, you're going downtown. I said, where am I going? He said, you're going to work on I&I staff for a while, instructor staff for a while. I said, okay, what do they do? He said, well, they're a unit that's downtown, and they do funerals, they do parades, they do all kind of, they notify families when there's loved ones been killed, or been injured. They do any array of different things. And he said, "You're going to go. They need somebody down there." And the old man seen fit to assign you to them for a while. So off I went to I&I staff. And part of that duty was the worst possible duty you could ever have, when you have to go to a home with somebody, with an officer and a chaplain, and tell them that their son or their grandson or whoever has been killed in action. And boy, I hated that. So I was there about 6 months doing that. We did a lot of parades and visiting dignitaries and parties and dances. I mean, we were wherever they needed a Marine in dress blues. That's where we went. That's what we did, and it was pretty good duty. I got to admit, it was pretty choice duty. And but eventually, I had to go back out to Grand Prairie and become a clerk again. So I went out there and finished up my tour there. And then when I was getting ready to get out, the Marine commander there was a full bird colonel, and he was getting ready to get discharged too. And he kind of took a liking to me, and L.B. Matthews was his name. So I had about 2 weeks to go, and I had to go see the recruiting sergeant. And of course, they give you the spiel, if you'll re-enlist for 6 years, we'll give you this much money, and we'll do this and we'll do that. So I went over and saw this staff sergeant, and he said, "Have you thought about re-enlistment?" And I said, "Not really." I said, "Tell me about it." And he said, "Well, if you want to re-enlist," he said, "we'll give you $3,500 to re-enlist for 6 years." And I said, "That doesn't sound like very much money for a 6-year stint." And he said, "Well, we'll also give you a promotion to staff sergeant." I calculated that out, and I said, "That's still not a whole lot of money involved here." I said, "Can you change my MOS and get me an MOS that'll guarantee me I won't go back to Vietnam?" He said, "I can't do that." He said, "That's the one thing that I cannot do." He said, I said, "I won't, if I re-enlist," I said, "they're going to send me back, and I'm not going. So I'm not going to re-enlist." He said, "All right." He said, "Okay, I understand." So he said, "Well, you got to go see the old man." So I went over back to the admin building, knocked on the colonel's door, and he said, "Come in, have a seat." He said, "Did you go see Staff Sergeant so-and-so about re-enlistment?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did. I just came from there." He said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "About what, sir?" He said, "About re-enlistment." I said, "Well, sir," I'll tell you this. I thought about it, I laughed about it, and I forgot about it. He said, "Get out of my office." So that was the last time I had any dealings with him. But he was a cool guy. He was a nice guy. And he said, "I didn't think he was going to re-enlist anyway." He said, "I can't blame you." So that marked my end of my career in the Marine Corps. But had I not known I would go back to Vietnam, I would have stayed in. I enjoyed the Marine Corps. I loved it. It's a regimented type of life. But I liked it. I really did. I just didn't want to go back to Vietnam and take another chance. 20 months in country was enough for me. So I got out. So.
Have I forgotten anything? I always turn to Richard. He helps me.
Well, I can't think of anything. I think you've covered a lot.
I was trying to keep it short, but one question led to the other questions. Mr. Kimball, is there anything you'd like to say wrapping up?
Well, I kind of read up on your program that you do here with Ford, and I think it's a great thing you guys do, giving veterans some exposure to younger people. The program and support from Ford is very much appreciated. I got to call John when we get done here and thank him for recommending me for this. I came as quite a surprise, I have to tell you. And I feel very honored to be a part of it, and I look forward to our eventual meeting again up at Ball State and going through the program up there with you guys. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people around that do a lot of things for veterans, and anything that they do positive for veterans is a plus with me. So yeah, I appreciate all of you that are involved in this program, and Ball State University. I know that they do a lot too. So I'm pleased with it. I'm very honored, humbled.
Well, it's our honor to come to your home and to meet with you here and to get your story, which I think is important for future generations as well, of students and historians to hear it straight from the source. You know what your experiences were. So.
Well, I've enjoyed having you here, and I've been through some things similar to this before, so it wasn't completely new to me. But this is a great deal. I hope that you keep getting the support from Ford that you need to continue this and keep expanding it and moving forward with it.
We do too. We do too.
Yeah.
So, on behalf of Ball State University and WIPB TV and also Ford Motor Company, I'd like to thank you for your service to our country. And thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.